Right, it's 12 o'clock. I want to welcome everyone to this week's Iowa Learning Farms Conservation Webinar Series. If you're new here, thanks for attending. For longtime listeners, viewers, welcome back. It's great to be able to welcome you again to the Learning Farms Webinar Series. And I'm Matt Helmers with Iowa State University, ISU Extension and Outreach, and Director of the Iowa Nutrient Research Center and faculty affiliate with the Iowa Learning Farms. And it's my great pleasure to be able to host again today on such a beautiful day in Central Iowa. So certainly thanks for taking the time. If you're in Central Iowa, thanks for taking the time to listen to this important webinar rather than taking a nice walk outside after the last couple of weeks. It's just such a beautiful day. Okay, you didn't come here to listen to me. So it is my pleasure to introduce the state climatologist of Iowa, Dr. Justin Glisan. He's going to talk today about the citizen science and the community collaborative rain, hail, and snow network, CoCoRaHS. Maybe, I don't know, he can correct me if I said that right or not. But with that, I'll turn it over to Justin. As always, if you have questions, please type those into the chat box, and I'll get those to him at the end of his talk. So, with that, the floor is all yours.
Thanks, Matt, and good to be with you all. I see lots of friends and colleagues on, including Henry, who is our national CoCoRaHS coordinator. So, good to see you all here. Matt mentioned this sunny day. They keep the state climatologist of Iowa in the basement of the Wallace building on the Capitol complex in Des Moines. So I don't have a window, but I have a door in case we have bad weather and I get bad looks. So yes, as Matt mentioned, I'm going to discuss CoCoRaHS, its importance across the United States and to the state of Iowa, and also some climatological trends that we see across the state that CoCoRaHS can help produce a more robust set of observations and tools for us as we move into a more variable climate. So the presentation highlights what is CoCoRaHS, who uses CoCoRaHS is a very important question that we get. The climatological trends that we're seeing across the state of Iowa, and some of these trends are applicable to the upper Midwest. And why that's important is all that water flows south through the Missouri and Mississippi basins, which are our east and west borders in Iowa. We'll look at heavy rainfall climatology. Recent climate, or over the last few decades, we've seen higher intensity and more often extreme rainfall events. And the picture on the left-hand side here is my CoCoRaHS gauge here in Des Moines. And this was the Ankeny June 30th event in 2018 when I picked up about 5.4 inches of rainfall over 3 hours. So definitely a very extreme event, and I'll show that in the final slides, and then some logistics slides that Matt's going to go over. Okay, so first of all, we have a good amount of National Weather Service co-op observing stations across the state. These anywhere from 160 to 200. And these co-op observers are they're not paid to do this. They do this because they care about the observation stations that they have. Some of these stations have been in their families for decades. So having these stations across the state help us produce the temperature and precipitation records that we use for various state and federal programs, but also they tell us the history of the state, where we've been, where we're going, and where we are currently. Now you'll notice wherever you see these red numbers here, those are precipitation values. Those are the stations across the state. So good coverage in the urban areas. You look at Des Moines, Cedar Rapids, over towards Omaha, clustering of these stations in more populated parts of the state. There are also gaps in this network, and that's why CoCoRaHS is so important, as I'll show you moving forward. We use various algorithms to help fill these gaps for temperature, but precipitation has become more variable, and that's why we've expanded, and we would like to expand CoCoRaHS across the United States and those countries that use CoCoRaHS. We also have radar indicated rainfall, and this is from the 27th, 28th event that we had just recently across the state, in which we saw a good amount of rainfall. But you'll note the pixel levels here. Those are pretty high resolution pixels, but within those pixels, we can have variability in rainfall events. And that's why having more rain gauges across the state allows us to get a better idea of how spatially and temporally precipitation is across the state. So what is CoCoRaHS? And I'll thank my CoCoRaHS colleagues for some of the slides that I'm using today, because it comes right from their website. Easy to access these through CoCoRaHS.org. But CoCoRaHS is a community collaborative rain, hail, and snow network. It's an acronym for this network. And it's a national grassroots, nonprofit, and community-based. Community-based is very important here because we have observers across the United States that produce observations every day, even those zeros that are so important. You'll more often than not report zeros than you will precipitation. And reporting zeros is very important, as I'll go into later. Now, this network has grown from its inception over 20 years ago at the Colorado Climate Center to a wide array of these standardized rain gauges across the United States and different countries and territories. And the volunteers that we use are from a small age. I give a lot of elementary school presentations, and you get these kids that really want to join this network and start reporting with the help of their parents or guardians. But we also have observers that have been through the last 20 years that are in their 80s and 90s, longevity reporters. Who takes these observations? You can do daily observations, but you can also do multi-day observations in case you want to go on vacation, for example. So across the bottom here, pictures of our observers across the United States. So this is a low-cost measurement tool, given that it's an easy training program. There's a video. We also go out into the community and train on CoCoRaHS. It's important that we have this network across the state because it gives us high-quality weather data in terms of precipitation, especially along the Gulf and the Atlantic coastline when we have hurricanes or tropical systems that are landfalling. With the variability of precipitation that we get from these events, having a more spatially robust network allows us to get better precipitation observations. And these precipitation observations go into the weather modelings that produce our forecasts and climatological outlooks, but they're also used by state and federal agencies for various programs in USDA and other federal agencies. An interesting piece of equipment on the top right there is used to get the diameter of hail, falling hail. As you notice, hail is in the name of the network, CoCoRaHS, and that's because hail also provides moisture to the surface. Now, how do you get to CoCoRaHS? Well, it's easy, CoCoRaHS.org, and volunteers are able to report their daily observations through the website on the left-hand side here, or how I do it every morning is through the app. And the app is very easy to use, very easy to log into. You can report weather observations, what we call observation notes, but also snow depth, snow liquid equivalent, so the liquid equivalent of snow fall that has occurred, and also the current snow depth and any snowfall that is added to the snowpack. Here is a map of the CoCoRaHS network currently. Now you'll see lots of white dots in there. That's where no precipitation has fallen, but where observers have reported zero observation or zero totals. Again, those zero totals are much needed because we need a consistent reporting and consistent observational record, because some of these federal programs and state programs that use CoCoRaHS to augment the National Weather Service co-op stations need a consistent reporting period so that observational data is trustworthy, for lack of a better term. But what you can see here is the February 28th rainfall event that we had that also produced the derecho down in Oklahoma and Texas. So a widespread rainfall event for much of the state of Iowa. You'll note those oranges and those reds, those give you an idea of those higher totals that we saw from the event. But why I show this map is because this map is updated dynamically. So once you input your data, it takes a little while, but that data is observable by anybody who goes to CoCoRaHS.org. And as I mentioned, immediately viewable within minutes. There's some lag time there depending on data upload, but this is a map from that 27th event. And then on the right-hand side here, an actual list of those stations and the totals that we got from those stations. So if you're a weather nut like I am and you want to know what types of rainfall that we've seen in past events, you can go back into the historical log on CoCoRaHS and actually see where you've seen higher intensity events to give you an idea of the strength of these events. I get a lot of calls from insurance adjusters and general public about the data that we get from CoCoRaHS, and our CoCoRaHS observers are very trustworthy. They're very independent, but they get those observations in, and we're able to use those. Why CoCoRaHS? I get this question often. Precipitation is becoming highly variable or more variable. Across the state of Iowa, when we get into the warm season, driven by mesoscale or our thunderstorm-driven rainfalls, you can have a gauge right in the middle of your backyard, get 2 inches of rainfall, and then you go 2 miles to your east, no rainfall. That's where we see these smaller scale thunderstorms that are dumping more rain, given that we have more water vapor availability in the atmosphere with a warming atmosphere. Also, rain gauges are few and far between. You notice the spatial distribution across the state of Iowa. We have tipping bucket rain gauges that are automatic at airports, and we have the National Weather Service co-op station rain gauges. But these CoCoRaHS gauges have really spread in spatial distribution across the United States. And we've added hundreds since 2018, especially in places where we've seen more pervasive drought. With these gauges, we're able to record drier conditions, and FSA, Farm Service Agency, is able to use these data as a means of validating and verifying crop indemnity, but also other federal programs that are used to help our farmers in times of very dry conditions, but also very wet conditions. We also use these measurements to get more accurate snowfall depths and hail depths, or hail liquid water equivalent from hail, but also the size of hailstones. And CoCoRaHS came out of an event that happened in July of 1997 in Colorado, where there was vast, widespread flash flooding that caused injuries, deaths, and property damage. So with the inception of CoCoRaHS was meant to produce higher resolution precipitation data, but also better snowfall and hail reports. Snowfall reports across the state of Iowa go back to 1874, and measuring snow has always been a difficult task to do in Iowa, given how flat and windy it is in wintertime. So having more observers out there to take snowfall measurements is very much needed. The main focus is to provide quality precipitation data, but also those educational opportunities. What rain gauges are for, how we can use them to get better data, but also understanding how the weather and climate system is changing. Where we've been, the federal record goes back to 1895, where we are currently with current conditions, and what those trends from our rain gauges are telling us as we move into the future and what we can expect. CoCoRaHS data users, as you can see, there are a myriad of users across the federal and state partnership, National Weather Service, hydrologists and meteorologists. We use these for drought monitoring, water supply and water conservation agents use these. Also, you have a lot of niche markets for these rain gauges, studying storms and mosquito controls. And I mentioned a really important one is Farm Service Agencies for crop indemnity, CRP, hazing, grazing, and haying. On the other side of that, we have the public-private partnership. We go out and do a lot of organizational instruction to teachers and students, but also allowing this data to be available to our community members and leaders to advise them on what we're seeing in the climate system. Are we becoming wetter? Are we becoming drier? Well, we're becoming wetter and drier, and those extremes are locking in more persistently. So having these gauges across our landscape is extremely important, for lack of a better phrase. I'll point a few out. The river forecast centers use these data to augment what they're seeing hydrologically, but also in snowpack water equivalent, SWE. We often get asked, well, how much snowpack availability water is within that pack? Not a lot. Basically across the state of Iowa, 10 to 12 to 1. So you would melt 12 inches of snow, you get 1 inch of water. But this quote really stuck out to me from a forecaster for the Mid-Atlantic River Forecast Center. Your data has filled in the holes in our National Weather Service and United States Geological Survey gauge network. So filling in those gaps, as I mentioned in that first map I showed you, is one of the most important reasons why CoCoRaHS is around. And then the National Operational Hydrologic Remote Sensing Center, again, that's snow water equivalent for snowpack monitoring. This gives an idea on river forecasts. If we get a rapid melt event across the upper Midwest with a very high snowpack, we could get into flooding concerns on the Mississippi and the Missouri side. Now, the National Weather Service has released the second flood outlook for the upper Midwest. And we are seeing, given higher snowpack and snow water equivalent in the upper Mississippi basin, the probability of flooding along the eastern border of Iowa from Dubuque south. So having the snow cores that we pull with the CoCoRaHS gauges, and then getting the liquid equivalent out of those gives us an idea, along with the modeling from the National Operation Center, what type of event we could see if we do get into X, Y, and Z weather patterns, or what our climatological outlooks are showing us. Okay, now we're going to flip gears because I'm going to show you why having CoCoRaHS around is so important. And these are our final slides in the presentation. So if we look at the annual average temperature for the state of Iowa since 1895, the higher the peak, the warmer the year, the lower the valley, the colder the year. The blue line is the trend. So since 1895 per decade, we've seen about a 0.2 degree increase across the state of Iowa. So the atmospheric column is getting warmer. Now, via a physical relationship we call the Clausius-Clapeyron equation, in warmer air and a warmer atmosphere, there's more evaporation, more precipitation, and that's because a warmer atmosphere can hold more water vapor. So basically a 1 degree Fahrenheit increase in atmospheric temperature gives us about 4 to 5% more water vapor availability. Why this is important is you have more water vapor availability in the atmosphere for storms to work with, but you also see the water vapor loading in the atmosphere to produce a meteorological event takes longer. And when that water vapor loading finally triggers a precipitation event, that's when we get into those higher intensity rainfall events. Not the 1-2 inch rainfalls over 24 to 48 hours, but those 3 to 4 inch rainfalls over several hours. And having a more robust observation network across the United States gives us more tools in the tool belt for analyzing these events, but also for getting better data into the forecast models. Now, if we look at the climatological decades, we use 30 years as an average. The current climate decade is 1991 to 2020. We use the last full 3 decades as an averaging period. But if we were to subtract the previous climate decade, 1981 to 2010, from the current climate decade, temperature on the left, precipitation on the right, what we're seeing is a general warming across the United States. But on the right-hand side here, wherever you see those green or greens, that's where we've seen an increase, 5, 10, 15% more precipitation just over the last 10 years. So seeing wetter pockets and drier pockets, we see that bimodal behavior with wetter conditions across the upper Midwest and then drier conditions in the desert Southwest. Again, these CoCoRaHS gauges in the National Weather Service network allow us to do better drought and wetness monitoring. As I mentioned several times, these federal and state programs rely on this precipitation data. If we look at the pivotal seasons for, or the pivotal months for the state of Iowa, given the agricultural focus we have across the state, April as a proxy for spring, October for fall, and July for summer, you'll note that for much of the state and for much of the upper Midwest, we've seen wetter springs and wetter falls. Where we've seen a decrease in precipitation, especially in Iowa, is in July. July is the hottest month for the state, also one of the wettest months historically for the state. So when we see a tail off of precipitation, rainfall during July, during the hottest month, that's where we can see drought expand and intensify rapidly. Having more gauges out there allows us to do a better job of drought monitoring with reporting those zeros. Now, via the Clausius-Clapeyron equation, as I mentioned, in a warmer atmosphere, more water vapor availability, we've seen an increase in decadal precipitation across the state. So since 1895, about 0.4 of an inch increase per decade across the state. Wettest year 1993, but then 2018, 2019, the 12th, those 2 years together, the wettest 2 calendar years in 150 years of Iowa records. So that's where we've seen an increase in precipitation, but it's becoming more spatially variable. And again, that's why we harp on having a more robust National Weather Service station distribution, but also augmenting that with CoCoRaHS gauges. I'll skip to the end here in the interest of time. What we've also seen, and I've kind of alluded to this, heavy precipitation events more often. So days when we see 1 inch or more have increased since 1950 from about 5 to 10, so doubling those just through 2019. So we're seeing those higher intensity events more often. Now, if we look at the distribution of rainfall, frequency is the vertical axis, horizontal axis is the amount of precipitation only over 24 hours. This is for central Iowa. Historically, when we do see rainfall events, they're 89% of the time, they're below an inch over 24 hours. Now, if you look at the last 20 years, we actually have shifted that distribution further right. So if you look at that final column there, those 3+ inch rainfall events over 24 hours historically occur 0.01% of the time. But if you look at just the recent term, the last 2 decades, we've tripled that probability. So we're seeing more intense rainfall events more often, more spring and fall rainfall versus snowfall, especially in spring. And winter is warming faster than any other season for Iowa. So we're seeing more higher intensity snowfall events. Again, I mentioned the Ankeny June 30th event, very isolated pocket of anywhere from 6 to 10 inches of rainfall over 3 hours. That's where you see very localized in the lower left hand or lower right hand here, those red dots, and then you just go several miles north and you start to tail off those totals. That's why we need CoCoRaHS. They give us higher density, more robust precipitation record for these higher intensity events that we're seeing more often. Another reason why we need more gauges, 2018 is a good analog year for us, the wettest year across the northern third of the state, D3 drought across the southern part of the state. Now, why I show this is if you look at the gauge distribution for southeastern Iowa prior to the 2018 drought, not a lot of gauges there. Now, I held 3 or 4 drought meetings per month in those southern counties and really expounded on the need for more gauges down there to help our farmers and ag stakeholders. And we've just exploded the amount of rain gauges that we see in the southern part of the state, but also around our cities. So it's really catching on, and the sky's the limit in terms of what we can provide for our stakeholders and farmers. Finally, we've also seen an increase in hail reports. So the hail reporting that we get from CoCoRaHS observers, now not all of them do the hail observations, but the need for hail observations is increasing given that we've seen more hail across the basically Midwest getting over into Dixie Alley into the eastern part of the United States. That's all I have on my part. I will let Matt take over for the next few slides. Here's my contact information. If you'd like to join CoCoRaHS, send me your information and we'll get you set up.
Right. Thanks so much, Justin, and feel free to get those questions in if you have them. For those that need a CCA CEU, if you can email Elena Whitaker, and her email is alenaw@iastate.edu by 5 p.m. today. So by Wednesday, March 1st, 5 p.m. with your name, then name you entered to watch the webinar, and your CCA number. And if we go to the next slide. Okay, those that have been on before have heard this, and if you filled it out, you only need to do it once. But if you watch this webinar live, if you'd be willing to fill out the voluntary demographic survey, you can scan the QR code in there, or we'll get it the link also posted in the chat box. This is voluntary, and if you've done it once, no need to do it again. Maybe Liz or Elena can help me with putting the link in the chat box. And we'll go little plug for the webinar next week in the next slide. We're going to have Adam Jenke and Kay Stefanik talk about the Iowa's Wetlands from the Sky, educational videos on wetland life and water quality with drones. So they've gone out and done some work capturing the wetlands from the air. So they'll be talking next week. Okay, we do have some questions here. Okay, the first one, are water vapor emissions a significant factor in the Iowa climate?
So we have row crop across the state, corn sweats, we've all heard of that. So yes, corn definitely does transpire. We do get pooled low-level moisture from transpiring corn and from transpiring crop. So we definitely do see an impact in water vapor availability, especially at the lower levels. And why that's important, as I mentioned, we see a temperature rise across the state and basically across the mid-latitudes. That temperature rise we don't see in the daily maximum temperature, so the daytime temperatures. We basically see that increase in the overnight lows. We have more water vapor availability, more cloud cover at night, that locks in the daytime temperatures, and hence that's where we do see warmer overnights. And these are projected out into the future in the climate modeling. Why that's important: more relative humidity, more low-level moisture, increased crop stress, increased livestock stress. So those are the things that we're tracking in terms of the trends in moisture availability. Yes, great question. And Matt, I'd be remiss if does Henry want to say anything? He's the VIP of CoCoRaHS.
Okay,
if he wants to
great.
say something, I'd be happy to.
Sure. So thank you. And Justin, I really appreciate you did such a great job. I should take you along with me, and I can sit in the audience and you can do the talks as I travel around the country. So really good. CoCoRaHS we want it to be a fun project for you folks as well. So you have the gauge out in your yard, you measure each day, and you start to learn about how much actually falls in your area. And then look a couple of counties away or blocks away, and you can see the variation. So the longer you participate, the better you start to see what falls where. And again, these observations are really critical to a lot of agencies out there. As Justin was saying, it's a fun thing. And again, we don't want to make it too burdensome. So we have these multi-day reports if you're away, and feel free to do that as well. In the U.S. right now, and the other 4 countries that we're participating in, we've got over 25,000 volunteers. So that's a lot of folks doing this in their backyards each day. And we say 7 o'clock to make the measurement, but we're okay 2 hours either way of that. And so if you like to sleep in a little bit, there's no problem with that. The other thing I want to mention right now, March Madness. So CoCoRaHS March Madness, you may not have heard of it. But we have a contest every March. Been going on since 2006, where we have the CoCoRaHS Cup. It's kind of like the Stanley Cup, and each state that recruits the most volunteers during those 31 days gets to keep the cup. And so we've got on our website, we've got a scoreboard that updates. So that's for new volunteers that sign up, and it's a lot of fun. Minnesota's won it the last 3 years. We got to kind of we'd love to move it south in your direction. So if you guys are interested in that, you can always contact us here at headquarters. But again, we want it to be a fun project, but you guys are really learning some good stuff with it and making important contributions. So thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Henry. Boy, it's as perfect timing to have this webinar because we got 31 days volunteers from the state of Iowa. So we got all 31 days. That's awesome.
And let me, one more thing, I'll sing
Yeah.
Henry's praises. He travels all over the United States and presents on CoCoRaHS and its importance. In fact, he came to Des Moines end of August, and going 3 years through the pandemic, or 2 years, however, I caught COVID prior to his coming to Iowa, and I was unable to see him. But I look forward to potentially the American Association of State Climatologists meeting coming up in June. So I can't say enough about Henry and the CoCoRaHS program.
And I want to say Iowa, what a great state. You know, I'd never been there before, and I was amazed what a beautiful place it is. I traveled all over from Des Moines up to Dubuque, Davenport, Pella, all those places. And I was lucky. I actually bought a car when I was there. We were hoping to get a Toyota Highlander, and they had one in Dubuque. And I actually wound up, instead of flying home, I drove home. So it's got a great place in my heart, and you got some wonderful people there. So what a great place.
Right. Thanks, Henry. Okay. A few more questions here. What is the cost to participate in the network?
So the rain gauge is about $34, I believe. I have a small budget here through the Department of Agriculture that I almost exclusively buy several boxes of rain gauges a year. And I'll do in my outreach and programming that I do across the state. If we find observers that are going to be consistent, and we find places out there that don't have good distribution of rain gauges, I'll give you a gauge if you're consistently reporting. Again, that data I use on a daily basis for drought monitoring, wetness monitoring. So the more data points that we have out there, the better. So my contact information is in the chat box there. Please let us know. And we also have commodities groups that I've worked with in the past that also purchase rain gauges and distribute to their members for observation. So yes, we can have availability depending on the year and depending on how many we have. But yeah, please reach out.
And just
this
gauge is not just a little tiny gauge that you get at the seed store. This thing, I don't know if you got you.
I'm going to go get one right now.
Okay.
It's not your grandfather's rain gauge. It's quite the beast, and can measure to the 100th of an inch, and also holds up to 11 inches. If you probably see some arcs floating along if you had that much there, but he'll show you that. There you go.
So for some of us, I have to say, this might have been our grandpa's rain gauge, because I can remember as a kid, my grandfather had a rain gauge, very, pretty much like that, about the size of the one. But you're exactly right, Henry, that most of them that I put out in my yard would not work. My little rain gauge I get for free.
Yeah, so it's in an inner and outer tube. The inner tube holds 1 inch of water, the outer 10 inches. So it's an 11-inch capacity. So again, on those multi-day events, if you're away, it has capacity to hold a lot of water. And I could knock this against my skull. It's so strong. So it's a great, well put together gauge. It comes with all the mounting hardware and also information within. So yeah, it's a very robust observation tool.
There was one here, Kevin in Wisconsin asked, can any gauge be used, or is it the standard one that's required?
The standard gauge. Now, Henry, I don't know what if you want to expound on that, but I always say that the standard gauge is necessary.
Yeah, and let me turn my camera on here real quick for you too. So there we go. Yeah, we ask everybody to use the same gauge. That way we have standardization across the network. And we've found a side-by-side comparison of this gauge for over 20 years, equivalent to the one the National Weather Service uses, their big 8-inch gauge. Tipping bucket gauges, some of the automated ones, can't keep up in heavy rainfall. So this is probably the most accurate gauge you're going to find out there. And so it does take a little work to work with it, but you're not going to find a better gauge out there.
All right. So I guess maybe I'm going to, as a moderator, I'm going to take the prerogative to ask my question. But yeah, I know we have a lot of, educators, extension folks on here. I guess what can we do to help you get more volunteers or help get the word out about this?
We have CoCoRaHS.org. The website has all kinds of training materials, videos on there explaining the program and how to become an observer. So if you're out and about, give that information out, text or email me or Henry. We're able to provide you with, I've got thousands of brochures that I bring around to my various speaking engagements and hand those out. It's just word of mouth. And March Madness, again, is another good tool that we see a bump in observers out there.
And I'm sorry for keep jumping in here, but I'm just going to say in many states, master gardeners are really a big part of this, and they get actually continuing education credits in many states just for having a gauge and reporting in their backyard. So that master naturalists, I don't know if you have those there in Iowa, but
we have master gardener and master conservationist. So
yeah, and those guys are great to work with on this. So if you're one of those folks out there, take a look at this.
Great. Do you have a few more questions that we want to get to? So next one, you mentioned needing more gauge stations, but this person asked, but how is radar data used to supplement measurements maybe in missing areas and interpolate between gauges?
Ooh, great question. So we have several radars that service Iowa, Johnston and Des Moines, the one in the middle, then Sioux Falls, South Dakota, Omaha, Quad Cities, and then La Crosse, Wisconsin. And then we have St. Louis to our south that covers our southern border. We use physical gauges to validate radar returns and vice versa. So you get into an instance where you have a thunderstorm and you get hailstones that come out of that. And now, of course, hailstones provide moisture, but we also get artifacts in the radar data. Those radars sense water. Hail looks like big raindrops. So we do get some anomalous behavior. So ground truthing radar data with actual gauge data provides better parameterization for radars moving forward. So that's why having more gauges out there, especially in more rural parts of the state or where we might see some radar diminishment of precipitation.
This one, I kind of had this question too, because I think you kind of showed it, but can you elaborate on how the hail measurements are conducted?
So what I do, whenever I know there's a hail event possible, I put sheet pans in the freezer and I'll run out and collect that hail on the sheet pans and then measure it with a ruler. The hail board there is actually a foam board that once the hail strikes it, you get basically the diameter of that hailstone, melt it down and get the liquid water equivalent from it.
There any websites that you commonly use or refer people to kind of relative to climate change and weather variability aspects?
Yeah, so the IPCC climate report, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, just released AR6. It's 3,000 pages. It's pretty dense, but we also have the 4th climate assessment, working on the 5th climate assessment. Go to climate.gov. That's the National Center for Environmental Information. Go to Google Iowa Climatology Bureau. We also have historic reports and impacts on the climate system. But yes, there are a myriad of websites out there. Part of my job as state climatologist is to get the information to those who need it. So if you can't find something you're looking for, my contact information is in the chat, and we'll get you the information you need.
Great, Justin. So as a state climatologist, are the state climatologists involved with the climate assessments then in some way?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
And we're actually across the state of Iowa, we're working on what's called the Iowa Climate Assessment. This is a joint partnership with Iowa State, University of Iowa, other state agencies. So that's currently going on, and we should have a final product within the next 12 to 14 months.
Great, great. All right, I think that pretty much answers our questions that I think Justin can, here. One last one.
Sure.
This one, is it helpful to have more than one gauge on any given farm, or if they are just a mile or two apart?
You know, I would say yes, and I'm a data nerd, so even looking at the distribution of rain gauges within a small diameter, or a mile, 2 miles, 3 miles. Again, you look at that the June 30th event. I had 5.4 inches at my house. You go 2 miles north, we're getting into the 2 to 3 inch range. So very highly variable thunderstorm activity can occur. So having multiple gauges spread out, I don't know if I can smile broader than having kind of robust data.
Right. And Kevin Erba is in Wisconsin. I think, Kevin, you're involved with Wisconsin efforts, and said you could jump in on that as well.
Yep. So as I've worked with farmers, and in particular crop consultants, on that very same question, we've had a number that said, I know that field always gets more rain, or always seems to get skipped by the storms. And so I've had farmers and crop consultants personally put out 3 or 4 gauges just to be able to look at that. And then after a couple of years, they say, yeah, I'm going to move this one to a different site. So yeah, that is something that we do see not only here in Wisconsin, but producers and crop consultants in Minnesota are doing the same thing.
All right. Well, I want to thank you, Justin, for always being willing to present for a webinar, and certainly to present on this topic. And Henry and Kevin, thanks for jumping in as well. I think hopefully for those in Iowa, okay, they've laid down the challenge. Our mission is to win March Madness. Our basketball team might not do very well in March, but maybe our rainfall, being involved with this can be better. So hopefully we get some people that volunteer. I think we probably will. So Justin, any last comments?
No, having Henry and Kevin on, it's like finding a $20 bill in your suit pocket. Henry, again, is a VIP in CoCoRaHS, and hearing that Kevin works in Wisconsin, just we want to get more gauges out there, so we'll do anything to do that. And thank you, Matt, for moderating and having me on, and always happy to chat about anything weather, climate related. So again, use my contact information.
Right. All right. Thanks so much, everybody. I hope everybody has a good day.